Welcome to our Power of Diversity lecture series. It is a real privilege today to welcome the renowned educator, author, and equality advocate, Dr. Johnnetta B. Cole, to the campus of Case Western Reserve University. When she took the helm at Spelman College in 1987, Dr. Cole became an inspiration for me, and I was a faculty member here at that time, and many other women in the academy who aspired to top leadership roles at colleges and universities around the country. From the moment she took office, she made a difference. Spelman's freshman class from that very first year on ranked the strongest academically among all historically black colleges and universities. Under Dr. Cole's leadership, the college completed a capital campaign which resulted in the largest sum ever raised by a historically black college or university at the time. Her leadership did similarly wonderful things for Bennett College for Women, and of course led to our getting one of our great leaders. More about that in a minute. Dr. Cole inspires us still through her tireless efforts and the work she's doing today, and I'm sure she'll talk about that. I am so thrilled to welcome her as part of our Power of Diversity lecture series. We launched this lecture series to inspire ongoing dialogue on issues of diversity and inclusion. After all, discussions on these issues transcend a single holiday or a single month. We need to have these conversations year-round, and on our campus, we do. This past fall, Case Western Reserve welcomed its largest, most academically accomplished, and most diverse class in its history. This was not by accident, it was by design. We are also sharing many things with Dr. Cole today, midway through our capital campaign, which is called Forward Thinking. We've raised more than $787 million toward our goal of $1 billion. We have already brought to our campus 30 new endowed professorships, new scholarships for students, new programs, and of course the Tinkerville University Center currently under construction next to our library. Of course, our efforts to support a truly inclusive campus are ongoing. Our Diversity Strategic Action Plan was adopted last year in a very inclusive effort led by our Vice President for Diversity, Inclusion, and Equal Opportunity. More about her in a moment, too. It is our roadmap for inclusion for years to come. And right now, faculty and staff and students are hard at work on a new university-wide strategic plan, an effort being led by our Executive Vice President and Provost, Dr. Bud Bazelak. Inclusion is a theme that will be woven through every aspect of that really important document. We are proud of our progress and passionately committed to our vision for the future. Leading that charge on our campus, I promised you more about her, is Dr. Marilyn Sanders Mobley. She came as our first ever Vice President for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, and she came from Bennett College for Women, where she served as its provost. She, I'm very proud to tell you, earned her PhD in English right here at Case Western Reserve. So this was a homecoming, and we are so happy that she is here, and she is going to do the introduction of our speaker today. Dr. Mobley, the podium is yours. Thank you all.
Thank you all. We're so happy that you're here today. And as President Snyder said, we are in the midst of implementing our Diversity Strategic Action Plan, part of the university-wide strategic action planning process. And part of our work is around advancing diversity through inclusive thinking, mindful learning, and transformative dialogue. So we are so happy to have this person here. We call her Sister President. I call her Dr. Sister President. I call her all kinds of wonderful names. Many of you know she's a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Many of you know she's a member of the Links. As President Snyder just said, she's done stellar work in higher education, stellar work in our country. First at Spelman, then at Bennett, and now working in the nation's capital at the Museum of African Art. And we just had a wonderful lunch conversation about it is is the Museum of African Art. There is another museum, which we shall not name, that some people are really excited about. Many of us know, and I can say this is Black History Month, and this is a month where we are celebrating African American history. And as President Snyder says, this is not the only month. They gave us the shortest month. We decided as a community we needed more than just that month in the entire year. So we have someone who's going to share with us today out of a depth of knowledge around these issues of diversity and inclusion. One thing that I can say about my time at Bennett is she started a diversity scholarship and had scholars who came to the campus to talk about diversity, one of whom was Howard Ross. And I think you may know this, but when we started talking about diversity from a senior leadership position, we invited Howard Ross to come to campus to meet with the President's Cabinet and the President's Council. And so we really appreciate that everywhere you have been, you have made a difference. When we thought about this Diversity Scholar Series, this Power of Diversity series, I knew at some point I was going to get you here. So today is your day, my sister. We're so happy that you're here, and we're looking forward to how you are going to help us talk about the case for diversity in higher education. Welcome.
Thank you. Sister President Barbara Snyder, and my ever so special sister friend, Dr. Marilyn Mobley. Sisters and brothers all, good evening. Good evening. It really is a special treat for me to be here on this campus and in Cleveland. Back when I was a much younger person than I am today, I would often pass through Cleveland. It was the only way that I could get to Oberlin College. But something very special happened to me while I was at Oberlin, and that is that I had to come to Cleveland in order to become a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. There were no sororities on Oberlin's campus. And so Cleveland has always somehow given me a great sense of warmth, despite the weather, and certainly of sisterhood. When I've referred to you, addressed you as my sisters and my brothers, I want you to know that biologically we are not related. At least I don't think I'm related to anyone who is here. But I use that language in part because I'm an anthropologist, certainly from growing up in the South and from participating in the civil rights movement. All of that helps me to know that kinship is not so much about biology as it is about behavior. Kinship is not so much about genes as it is about shared dreams. And so I'm going to make an assumption. I'm going to assume that here in this place at this moment are folks who share a dream. And it will not surprise you that the dream that I think we share was first so movingly articulated 50 years ago in a place called Washington, in a setting involving a march on Washington, and of course spoken by Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. If it is true that in this room at this moment we all share that dream, then it's absolutely essential that we, sisters and brothers all, turn our attention to how we can help make the dream a reality. a dream of genuine sisterhood and brotherhood. To make that a reality, certainly on our college and university campuses, but in our communities, in our nation, and in our world. So what is the state of the dream? Or to be a little more pointed, the race question in our nation? I think we get an insight if we go back to the words of one of the greatest scholars and activists in all times. Of course, the great Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who said the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Here we are in the 21st century, and we still have not successfully dealt with the color line. And we've got so many other lines that need our attention. Gender, sexual orientation, religion, nationality, age, physical abilities and disabilities. It is not a good thing that from certain quarters in our country we continue to hear false, destructive messages. All people of color in the category of the other in relationship to real Americans. The proper place for women is in the House, and the reference is not to the House of Representatives and the Senate too. Heterosexuality is simply the only normal way. And as for the poor, they're that way because they just prefer it, or it's simply their own fault. This kind of language, these diversive beliefs are clearly at the base of bigotry and discrimination. And all of us, each of us, is required to step up, speak up, in order to first analyze and understand such negative reactions to difference, and then to do something about it. Turning to the academy, there is an enormously destructive myth that excellence in education is impossible if there is diversity. I am convinced of the absolute opposite, and that is that excellence in education is only possible if there is diversity. There's a wonderful Chinese saying that I like to refer to make this point. One flower never makes a spring. I want to make 2 points about this false assumption. The first is that excellence in education requires the incorporation of diverse perspectives, attention to diverse cultures in our curriculum. To be well educated, certainly students here at Case, students at any college or university in our country, they better wrestle with Shakespeare. They better wrestle with T.S. Eliot. But they should do no less with the works of Maxine Hong Kingston, Sandra Cisneros. They need to read Joy Harjo and Paula Gunn Allen on Native American women's realities. How dare anyone, man or woman, consider him or herself well-educated, who does not know the works of Audre Lorde, of Adrienne Rich, the powerful works of Gwendolyn Brooks and Toni Morrison. My second point is that excellence in education is advanced when the very participants in this great process of teaching and learning are of diverse backgrounds and conditions, and the higher education institution creates an inclusive environment. An inclusive environment that is critical for retaining diverse students and faculty. Now, with respect to the need to diversify our faculties, we know that even on the most progressive of campuses, it can be a challenge to recruit and an even greater challenge to retain a multiracial, multi-ethnic faculty. But we also know, I hope, that taking a business as usual attitude will never bring color to what remain across the face of the academy, predominantly white faculties. And so we got to be creative. We've got to demand of our white faculty colleagues that they struggle to bring folk of color to their campuses. But they must also struggle to raise their own consciousness and engage in the kind of study and human empathy that will permit them to teach and treat students of color in fair and effective ways. As an anthropologist and as a practicing human being, I am convinced of the power of human empathy. I think with enormous work, I mean a lot of work, I'm talking about sun up to sundown, men can come to empathize with the realities of women. Gringos with the realities of Hispanic peoples. White Americans with the realities of Black Americans. As one of my sheroes, Audre Lorde, put it, if Black professors can teach Shakespeare, then white professors ought to be able to teach James Baldwin. I cannot be all of the peoples of the world, but surely through human empathy, I can understand what it must have been like to be Jewish in the era of Nazism. Surely I, through human empathy, can understand what it is like to be a paraplegic. Am I not capable of understanding what it must be like to come to a country that says we're not so sure you should immigrate here? Now, while our professors, our white professors, are using human empathy to teach, and to teach well, it is still not enough if we do not have a fully diverse faculty. And you know, I'm just remembering, it's not in the notes, that James Baldwin once said, "You cannot teach students that you do not love." We're all aware of a very major, indeed I'm prepared to say extraordinary step that our nation has taken, not once, but twice, in electing Barack Obama to serve as the 44th President of the United States. For folk of my generation, and I'm looking out to see at least a few folk in here in my generation, we said over and over again, in 2008, we said it, I never thought I would see this. What is the rest of it? In my lifetime. But we did, and we've seen it twice. An African-American president, a black family now lives in the White House, a house built in part by enslaved labor. But those historic and historic realities do not mean that we are now in a post-racial society. Of course, the election of President Obama tells us that race as a barrier to the highest office in the land has been challenged. But clearly it does not mean that racism has ended. It is possible for white folk to accept a black leader in the highest office in the land and still support institutionalized racism. And as you know, when institutionalized racism combines with poverty, the results are devastating for our nation's people of color. It is that double jeopardy of racism and poverty that leads to African Americans suffering twice as much unemployment as white Americans. It is behind people of color being at the top of the list in terms of life-threatening diseases. It is behind the association of people of color with substandard housing. It is the double jeopardy of racism and poverty that propels such high dropout rates for black and brown students and sends more of our young African American and Latino men to jails and prisons than to colleges and universities. Because various forms of bigotry and discrimination are so widespread and so tenacious, many are led to say and to believe, you know, it's just human nature. It's just human nature to not like people who just sort of aren't like you, to create these systems of inequality based on difference. A zillion times no. Bigotry is not just human nature. It's not passed on genetically. Bigotry is learned. And because it is learned, I got news, great news. It can be unlearned. I've got even better news. We can just stop teaching it. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that we can rid the world of bigotry by declaring a moratorium on teaching it. How well I know that bigotry and discrimination are about power and privilege. And it's not easy for folks who've got it, power and privilege, to just one day give it up. We have to offer to the empowered and the privileged a better, a more rewarding alternative. We need to imagine and work toward making real a world in which difference doesn't make any more difference. We need to envision and then create communities where everyone is respected and invited to the table. And if the table isn't big enough, we're just going to have to build a bigger table. Here in this great country of mine, power and privilege based on race and gender stand out. And so, as an African-American woman, I know what it is like not to have white skin privilege and not to have male privilege. But it is so important that I acknowledge and deal with the reality that there is some power, there is some privilege that I do have. I clearly have power and privilege as someone who is upper middle class. I have power and privilege as someone who is a heterosexual. I have power and privilege because I am a Christian. I have power and privilege because I am physically able. Although I must tell you, a very dear friend of mine who works in the disability community says, you can say you're physically able. Wait long enough, you'll see. This reality that each of us has some form of power and privilege flows from the fact that each of us has multiple identities. And so it's very important for us to be aware of those identities and to guard against efforts to characterize us in singular terms. I want to name one reality that really makes this point. It is unfortunate but true that being the victim of one form of bigotry or discrimination does not make someone immune to victimizing others. For example, some white women who have been victims of sexism will consistently practice racism. Some black folk who have known the bitter sting of racism are homophobic and practice heterosexism. Some people who are Jewish and have been victims of anti-Semitism can harbor feelings and carry out actions that stem from Islamophobia. Now, you might be thinking, how does all of this relate to the world of education and specifically to Case Western Reserve University? It's got everything to do with the state of diversity and inclusion on your campus, for the simple reason that the academy, this particular academy, is made up of people who bring their feelings, their beliefs, their needs, and yes, their hang-ups to their college or university. It does seem to me, though, Sister President, that you have decided, or at least some folk at Case have decided, along with Dr. Mobley, you have decided, just as the leadership in many corporations has decided, that there is a moral reason and a business imperative for promoting diversity and building an inclusive culture. A moral imperative means simply that it's the right thing to do to make sure that qualified people of underrepresented groups have an equal opportunity to be employed as staff at Case. to join the ranks of the faculty, and to I'm going to slip on that word, so I won't use it, and to be students here. Matriculate was the word I was going to slip on. But just as the leadership in many corporations will go on to say that there is a business case for diversity, I put forth the proposition that there is a pedagogical case for diversity in the academy. Because when diversity is absent, you cannot be successful with the task of teaching and learning that prepares students to live effectively in what is now a highly diverse world. Corporate leaders say they need a diverse workforce because the presence of diverse people sets up the opportunity for different perspectives and for new and highly innovative ideas to flourish. And thus, the corporation develops a competitive advantage. In the case of the academy, it's really the same. Quality teaching and learning flows far more easily when the participants in this process bring to the discussion different ideas, different experiences, different truths. I do sense, by reading your material, by knowing my sister VP, Marilyn Mobley, by having some very special moments this afternoon with the sister president, that there is a strong commitment to try to do the right thing, but also an understanding that it is the pedagogically sound thing that you must do. And yet I must ask you a few questions. I need to know if it's case when you want to increase the number of racial and ethnic minorities, a phrase that shortly will have no more meaning, when minorities are the majority, but when, here in case, you wish to increase the number of racial and ethnic minorities, do you do it by increasing the recruitment of international students? And what about women? When you say that you want to increase the number of women on your faculty and staff, on the board of trustees, not perhaps as needed in the student body, is that good enough? And do you take an easier road and find more white women, leaving special outreach to women of color alone? What about underrepresented groups who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender folk? Or is that sort of a taboo topic when we want to talk about diversity? And what about individuals from various communities of the disabled? Is it that you kind of don't mind doing it, but there is the whole problem of cost? And then I, of course, have to ask a question about the unspoken word, the C word. It's called class. Now, in light of all that I have said, what now must I ask of you? You who are already in leadership roles on this campus, in the community of Cleveland. And if you're not a leader, you sure better be intending to become one, otherwise you're in the wrong place. What I must ask of you now, well, some very concrete things. But I want you to know that I'm about to ask of you not a single thing that I do not continue to ask of myself. First, to be conscious of, to really learn about how you learned your prejudices. Interrogate yourself about your particular journey around questions of diversity and inclusion. If you are a parent, and I never assume that everyone wants to be a parent, but if you are a parent or you imagine yourself becoming a parent, I ask of you to do one of the most revolutionary things that you could possibly do. Do not teach your children to be bigots. Secondly, I ask that each of you get in touch with your multiple identities. And once you do so, then you must never relate to others or let others relate to you in terms of only one attribute. Of course, I also urge you to examine your own power and privilege. For if you are to avoid using your power and privilege in ways that exploit and oppress others, then you must be in touch with what power and privilege you have, the basis of it, and how it can be used in positive ways. And then finally, I ask of each of you that you take personal responsibility for helping to transform this important, highly regarded research university. In concrete terms, that can mean for faculty making sure that the curriculum never returns to being focused on the 3 W's. You know what the 3 W's are? It's that curriculum that is absolutely committed to what is Western, what is white, and what is womanless. It means that every department will refuse to move forward with a faculty or a staff search if there isn't a serious, diverse pool of candidates. And that means struggling against what one of my colleagues, anthropologist Irma McLaurin, calls the, what does she call it? The Rolodex of inequality. Just go to the Rolodex. You know people. You have friends, many of whom are just like you. Watch the Rolodex of inequality. It will perpetuate what you've already got. It means not only recruiting a diverse class of students every year, and we should have applauded when the sister president described this incoming class. But it means not just recruiting the most diverse class that Case has ever had. It means creating the kind of an inclusive culture that will help these students to really feel welcomed, to feel valued, to feel that they are genuinely a part of the Case community. It means calling out any and all expressions of bigotry and discrimination that you happen to hear or to see. This kind of work, this work around diversity and inclusion, is certainly not easy work. If it were, we probably would have finished the job by now. in some ways, some folk have been at this for a mighty long time. No, it's not easy, but it is incredibly necessary work. And so we have to commit to creating and sustaining an approach to education that first of all simply acknowledges and celebrates human diversity, that can just be joyous in saying, look what the good Lord, she did. Put all of these different kinds of folk on this earth. But in addition to celebrating that diversity, we also have to understand that without a challenge to power and privilege, it is no more than a righteous celebration. The kind of world that we live in now, far more diverse than ever, far more complex than ever, requires that the academy, call it higher education, call it colleges and universities, must play the role that in so many ways it is uniquely able to play. And that is first to understand the world. But does the academy not also have the obligation to help to change the world? Each time that I think about how difficult this work is, I think about the words of yet another of my sheroes, Margaret Mead, who said something that some of you probably have on a coffee cup, maybe it's on your mouse pad, but they may be some of the most important words for any of us to believe. Margaret Mead said, never doubt the ability of a small group of committed citizens to change the world. It's the only way that it ever happens. I'm going to conclude the talk now, and I want to do so by telling a story. And I'm prompted to tell the story because of something that Sister President Snyder said when we met this afternoon. She said, Vice President Mobley is an outstanding professional. Not those words, something like it. Excuse me. And then she said, but the work of diversity and inclusion is not hers alone. So I'm going to tell you a story. The last line of this story will tell you, well then, who is responsible for diversity and inclusion at Case? It's a story that was a favorite of yet another shero, Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer loved to tell this story at the end of a talk because she wanted the folk with whom she was speaking to know now the work that's been laid out. Who's supposed to do the work? Many of you know of Fannie Lou Hamer, one of 17 children, sharecropping family, a woman without all that we have been given in terms of education, but was she wise? You think of her going up the steps of the Mississippi State House, taking black people to exercise their right to vote, with water hoses at their backs, dogs snipping at their ankles, billy clubs going against their backs. But she pressed on. And I'm going to tell you something. anytime it's time to vote, when black people don't want to go vote, I look up and ask that the spirit of Fannie Lou Hamer will come down and haunt them. She went on, of course, to help to create the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. So Fannie Lou Hamer loved to tell this story. And again, the last line will tell you who is responsible in the city of Cleveland. Who is responsible at Case Western Reserve University for creating a more inclusive environment in which diverse people can flourish. Here's the story. It's a story about some young boys who one day decided to play hooky from school. Well, if you're going to play hooky from school, you got to get into trouble, because otherwise there's no point in playing hooky from school. So they found a bird and tortured this poor bird until it was almost without life. But then they got bored. So now what were they going to do? Aha, said the ringleader, I know what we can do. We can go up the road a piece where there's an old lady. That old lady thinks she knows everything. Well, she doesn't. When we get to that old lady, I'm going to ask her a question that she will never be able to answer. Well, what's the question? He says, here it is. See this bird that we just finished messing with? I'm going to put it behind my back. And I'm going to say, old lady, this bird that I have behind my back, is it dead or is it alive? Now, if she says the bird, why, it's dead, I'm going to release my hand and the bird will fly away. But if I say, old lady, is this bird dead or alive? If she says, why, the bird is alive, I'm going to crush it. They did their high fives, their bumps. They were so proud of themselves. And off they went to find the old lady. And with that attitude, well, not all, but too many of our young'uns have. The ringleader said, yo, old lady, you gonna answer this question? And with that great compassion and love that so many of our elders have, she said, why, my sons, I'll try. So up steps the ringleader, gonna ask her a question she cannot answer. He said, old lady, you see this bird? I'm gonna put it behind my back. Now you tell me, is it dead or is it alive? The old lady, very much like a lot of the elders I knew as I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, she decided to take her time, her sweet time. So the old lady said, the bird. You are asking me about the bird. You want to know, where is the bird? She said, you know, the bird, why, it's in your hands. That's the answer. Not in the hands of Dr. Marilyn Mobley alone. Not in the hands of President Barbara Snyder. Not in the hands of the provost. Not in the hands of any single person. It's in all of your hands. That's where the work is. Thank you.
Thank you. May I give you a hug?
Yeah, because hugs are good.
Absolutely wonderful.
Hugs are good. Hugs are good.
Okay. So we have a few minutes for questions for Dr. Cole.
Or if not questions, you may want to say something, or you might want to testify, but just don't use the Baptist tradition of testifying, because we'll be here all night. So, good. If there are no questions, it means there's total agreement.
There's a hand over here. I'd just like to say that my daughter's best friend is a graduate of John, and they went to grad school together, and they still remain friends. She lives in Atlanta, and she works for Emory College.
Thank you for letting me know that. Thank you. You know, it's one of the almost indescribable joys, no matter where I go, including to the continent, which I do a lot now, the African continent, with the work I'm currently doing. There's somebody who's either a Spelman sister, or a Bennett Bell, or a mama or a papa who sent them there. I mean, there is some connection to those two historically black colleges for women. Yes.
I noticed in your presentation that you give a lot of attention to language, and language that relates, that may be more gender oriented. And so your use of heroes and sheroes instead of heroes, and you know,
her story and his story. Mm-hmm.
I mean, they really help raise our consciousness as to how our language also reinforces
Absolutely.
The dominance of one gender.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering how our students can get that same kind of awareness. I mean, again, this is something that I've heard because I was Spelman graduate in 1975.
Oh, Spelman sister. You see, I make my point.
I'm just wondering how our students get, get this sense of awareness in terms of the power of language, in terms of how we, impressing people or uplifting.
I'm so glad you raised that. You know, I do work at the Smithsonian, and as Marilyn said, my museum is the National Museum of African Art, but it's a part of 19 museums and the National Zoo. One of them is the Museum of the American Indian. And last week at that museum, there was an incredibly important program that raised the question of how dare we in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, have a football team called the Redskins. And then we're told, oh, nobody means anything about that. I once read an article by, I think it was Joy Harjo, who is a Native American feminist. And she said, you think it doesn't matter? Well, how would you like to sit next to someone at a football game who kept saying, go, Sambo, go, get him, Spick, get him, Spick. I mean, it is so offensive. It is not just language. Language has the most extraordinary power to describe, to praise, to denigrate, to instruct, to inspire. It can do all of that. But we must be conscious when we use it. So thank you, my Spelman sister. Yes, please.
I must make the connection for the students of Spelman and City of Cleveland. Up in Lakeview Cemetery, we have the grave of the Spelmans. They were the in-laws of John D. Rockefeller. And the Spelmans came here from Rootstown, Ohio, where they conducted on the Underground Railroad. And the only time Mrs. Spelman said she ever broke the Sabbath was when she was conducting people through Cleveland. Then she would cook for them. And they had 2 daughters, the Spellmans, and they sent them to a college in New York. And when the Civil War was over, the teachers came, set up a school for the slaves down south. And they remembered that their student had married the richest man in the world at the time, Rockefeller. So they came to Cleveland to speak at the Baptist church and asked him for money, and he gave them the money. And a few years later, they thought they would like to make it into a college, so they came back and they asked him for money, and they said, "And sir, if you give us the money, we'll call it Rockefeller." And he said, "I'll give you the money, but you have to call it Spellman."
Uh-oh. Her story beautifully told. Many folk who come on the campus and have the real joy of going into Sisters Chapel assume that it's called Sisters Chapel because African American women will often refer to each other as sister. Or we will use the term for women who are not African American if they're righteous, like the president. So that is not the case. It is called Sisters Chapel because it's named for the Spellman sisters. Talk about a couple of unbelievable women. They started Spellman. Sophia B. Packard and Harriet E. Giles. And they said so much that is still right at the center of that college, just as it is by extension, I think, to any strong college or university. The first of the 2, they were really very close, but they were presidents in order. First Sophia B. Packard, then Harriet E. Giles. These are white women. And Sophia B. Packard loved to say, Spellman women must have a loyal scorn for second best. Yes, my sister.
We'll take
Please.
2 more. This one and one more.
Thank you very much, Masora. Thank you. Well, I understood you to say you must question yourself about where your prejudices come from. As a former teacher, when I'm given a specific curriculum, specific textbooks, and specific scope and sequence, then I am to teach from that. And if I defer from that, I am called to carpet about that. Now, how do I not infuse prejudice, but to expand thought? And I'm given specifics to deal with.
Sabotage. What else can I say? You know, the beauty of the human mind is that we have the ability to just imagine and think and create. And so you take that curriculum and you nevertheless find a way to teach what you know needs to be taught. And obviously, I believe very deeply in one of the many proverbs you'll hear all over the continent of Africa. She who teaches must learn. She who learns must teach. And so in the process of teaching, I think our most delightful moments come when we are learning, when we are learning. One more?
I saw another hand back there. Yours? Yours and then the person in front of you.
No, we're going to go in another order because the woman's going to have the last word. So we're going to take the bro first.
Good idea.
Come on, bro. We want to hear from you.
Dr. Mobley will attest to my desire to complicate things quite often.
Don't put me in.
But a previous question commented on this desire to sort of subvert many of the terms that we use. So history may become herstory. But what if, in the case of an individual, or how do we pay attention to our language when we may not want to restrict ourselves to binaries? And for individuals like me who actually do study the language and try to work against binaries. You know, language is limiting, so how do we account for that specifically?
It's tough. It's tough. And we have to, I think, let our ears and, more importantly, our souls begin to relate to words we haven't used before. So rather than history and her story, it's the people's story. You know, and when you first say it, the people's story, but it is the people's story. Because there's some folk who do not define themselves in gender terms that are either male or female, who aren't really interested even in the notion of androgyny. So language, thank goodness we have it, is really capable of doing almost anything we want it to do. We just have to do it. Okay, woman's gonna have the last word.
Hi, my name is Kenisa Gray. I'm a student here at Case. I'm a freshman. I just want to say thank you for coming. And I also have a question. Here at Case, compared to everyone else, I am one of the very select few. And I would like to know, I would like to see more people like me here at Case. And I do a lot for what I can with the children in Cleveland and public schools and all of that kind of thing. But I would like to know if you have any suggestions for what I can do as a student to see more people like me and other minorities here at Case or Harvard, Princeton, anywhere else.
It's a wonderful, wonderful question, and what a great way for us to bring closure. In a meeting that Dr. Mobley convened this afternoon, I want you to know that there were faculty addressing that very question. It really made me feel good. Actually saying that we've just got we. You see, you all already have me. Now I'm we. Now I'm Case.
Case Western here.
They were saying that they've got to build sturdy bridges into the community of Cleveland. Because it's not only, and these were my words, not only a moral responsibility to do so, but it's in the self-interest of this university. It is in the self-interest of Case Western Reserve to bring more young folk like you, as Nina Simone would have described you, young, gifted, black, and a woman. I added the last part. So I think it's a process. It is not an event. It's not, we did it. Now we know exactly what to do. It's a process. It's a process. And you know what? Being a part of that process is in your hands. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much.